Just a Hey, Carrie, just a quick comment. I just see on the chat that you said that we're going to be starting at 1 p.m.
Oh, yeah, no, 12.
12.
1 p.m. somewhere.
It is.
Yeah.
Not here, though, not yet.
For anybody signing in from the Maritimes.
Yeah.
12 o'clock
All
p.m.
those people. All those people. Yeah.
My brain's already in mode for what's happening after this.
Yeah.
Thanks, Art. All right, we're up to 6 people.
Am I going to be able to see people or no? Is it set up like a...
It's set up as a webinar, so the only people you'll get to see is myself and Art. But it will allow you to screen share, and then it just kind of keeps things running a little bit smoother, and not having to mute individuals during the presentations, and
Okay.
keep things on time.
Okay.
So Art will do an introduction. He'll kind of talk briefly about my screen that I have up right now that everybody can see. And then I will take down my screen and you'll be able to replace that with what you have.
Okay.
So, Carrie, do you want me to start? Okay, you're muted. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third town hall. Personally, I can say I'm really excited to hear about the topic today and invite everybody to use the Q&A button on your screen to ask questions to the group as we go through. You know, our topic today is really boils down to employee well-being, employee and employer well-being, and I think you know, that actually threads into everything that we've been talking about already over the last 3 weeks. So it's a big picture topic, and it's something that I think really everybody can draw something from. So with that, I am going to just go through a little introduction on our speaker. So today we welcome Monique Hackert. Monique is the Human Resources Director for Ball Horticultural Company. She's bringing 15 years of experience in the horticultural industry. Monique moved from the Netherlands 15 years ago and has worked in many different roles in horticulture, from sales, marketing, to customer service, leading and training an employee development effort, and is now heading up the HR department for Ball. Ball is a global leader in horticulture. Ball develops, produces, and sells plants and plant inputs around the world. In her current role, Monique oversees all HR functions and sets strategies on how Ball can best attract and retain top talent. In her work, she prioritizes the experience and well-being of Ball's employees. And just a little bit more about Ball before I hand it over. So Ball Horticulture is a worldwide distribution company that sells seeds. Oh, I think we've already gone through that. So anyways, apologize for that, and I will hand it over to you, Monique.
Thank you very much, Art. I appreciate it. And thank you, Carrie. Thanks for having me today. So introduction is done, was lovely. Thank you very much. I've been in my role as HR director here at Ball for 3 years. And my journey through Ball was a 15-year journey so far, and just led me in different areas of the company. So I've also been the customer of HR and of the company for a long time, an internal customer. And so I like to look at things through the eyes of the employee. And so today, we're going to talk about maintaining a healthy workforce. And health is not just physical health, right? Health is emotional health, social health, financial health. So we'll look at it holistically on the employee's well-being. And when I initially talked to some of the organizers about this topic, it really was around how that younger generation coming into the workforce and what they are expecting of an employee, and how some of their demands could be burdensome on our companies. And so so I wanted to spend some time to go over different generations in the workforce, how that is beneficial, and how that can present some challenges, and then talking about really the needs of these younger generations. And really their biggest ask is about well-being, prioritizing their well-being. And so we'll go through what that looks like, and then we'll close with a little bit of a broader look at what else these younger generations are looking for. So let me share my screen and we can start the presentation. Okay. Can I have a thumbs up, Art, if you can see my screen? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so at the moment, we have 4 generations in the workplace, or at least of a significant size, right? So for business owners and managers, as yourself, it's very useful to understand the characteristics of each of the generation, including what motivates them, what their communication style is, and understanding really your team to help you adapt your leadership style. And so a multi-generational workforce really just says there's different generations in it. And their generations are defined by significant world events that occurred during their lifetime, as well as a general parenting style that they received in the time that they were raised. So the 4 generations that have significant number of people in the workforce right now: baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y or millennials, and then Gen Z. So I wanted to go through each of those quickly before we hone into that younger generation. Also, talking about generations can also be a little tricky, and we're really talking about generalizations of these generations. And so all employees are unique. And I really would like to press that you should treat each employee as an individual first and foremost. Now, some of these, generational comments and characteristics, again, are generalizations, so they can help you directionally. But again, please just talk to your employees. Okay, let's start with the baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. Now, this generation is really the oldest generation currently in the workforce with significant numbers, right? We had the silent generation before that, but they make up right now about less than 2% of the workforce. And so things that are happening when they were growing up, the first nuclear plant was installed, Martin Luther King marches and assassination happened during their upbringing, and obviously they were born right after the Second World War, and there are a lot of them in the workplace. And so when you look at what they're generally known for in the workplace, is they're really loyal. So they're not as much of a job hopper. They're very self-motivated. They have very strong work ethic and would prioritize sometimes work over their personal life, and willing to make personal sacrifices for their professional success and the company's success. And they are competitive. Now, if you think about managing this generation, it's really about providing clear, specific goals and deadlines. I would say is a great generation to start a mentorship program with, and have them mentor, have them use that experience and years of tenure, and then really put them in a place of teamwork. I really appreciate that. If you would ask a baby boomer to self-assess the skills, they would say they would rank logical thinking as one of their best work skills, and then leadership skills as number 2. Okay, Generation X. So Generation X, significantly world events that shape them include the AIDS epidemic, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the invention of the internet, and then the subsequent dot-com boom. Now, this generation is known to be efficient. They're really direct in their communication style, like direct feedback. They are really adaptable to new technologies. They're independent, and they're kind of like the steady Eddie generation, born between 1965 and 1980. So here's kind of a summary of how would you manage Gen Xers. Aim to be efficient, direct feedback. They like their independence and autonomy, and that really improves their engagement in the job. Millennials are next, generation number 3 in the workforce, and where the Generation X, the previous one, is kind of like the sandwich in between a lot of baby boomers and a lot of millennials, right? So those two were definitely the larger populations, and in Gen X, there's a lot less of them. So currently, I think about 30% of a workforce is millennials, and they're being accused of being kind of entitled, whiny, irresponsible, but they're really influenced by the drastic social and social economical changes. And so they are the biggest workforce now, but they're also the most prone to do some job hopping, switching from one company to another. And this is really coming from a place that they're not super loyal to institutions or to companies. And so making a personal connection with them becomes really important to retain these millennials. So they're competitive, they are achievement-oriented, they're tech-savvy. They are very focused on that work-life balance, which we're going to talk a lot about later, about that flexibility expectation. And then they're really open to seeking new, unique work experiences. And this is one of the reasons why changing jobs is probably they have the highest percentage or number of people changing job than any other generation. And so what we want to do is we want to get to know them personally, communicate in depth about their progress and output. So where Gen Xers were about direct feedback, this generation is a lot more about more feedback in the moment, and continuously talking about their progress and moving forward so they can see the career opportunities and growth within that company. And they're all about that work-life balance, which comes in the form of flexibility. Generation Z. So this generation, I'm looking at Ball. So Ball in North America has about 720 employees. Worldwide, a lot more depending on the season. But when I look at North America, I see this generation for the last 3 years doubling in number every 3 years. So they're really coming into the workplace, and they are the first true tech generation. Like, they have never seen a world without the internet, right? They have probably never seen a phone or had a phone besides a smartphone. And so they are also most diverse. So almost 30% of this generation is a visible minority. So they're not white. In the United States, it's about 48%. I believe in Canada, it's about 30% of this generation is not white. And so they're visibly, they look a lot different than what our industry typically looks like, right? And so they also identify themselves not necessarily as one identity. They like to see themselves as having multiple identities tied to them. So how do they express themselves? So, for example, a lot of Gen Zers like unisex clothing that could be worn by men or women. 76% of Gen Z belongs to a religion, but is also more liberal. 20% of them do not consider themselves exclusively heterosexual, when opposed to the 10% of other generations. And so they believe that everybody is unique, they're individualist, and therefore should be celebrated and treated differently. So where generations ago it was about just treat everybody the same so you don't get in trouble, now it is acknowledging those differences and acknowledging the individual qualities of them that could be made up by different identities, celebrating them, embracing it, and making them feel heard. And so they're very open-minded and progressive. Okay, so this generation really likes to multitask. They like a lot of autonomy, self-direction, and again, that work-life balance. So that's definitely something they have in common with the millennials. What they do not have in common with the millennials is their need for stability. So you think about when they came actively in the workplace, they, and a lot of them, went through the pandemic were their first experiences of the workplace, right? And so there's a looming recession, and there's all this uncertainty with them going into the workplace. So they actually look for a lot of stability. And they job hop because they're young, and every young person that graduates or comes out of school, they tend to be more of a job hoppers than people that have more that are older. Right, so that's why they job hop, but they really looking for stability in a company, and would like to stick around if that fits their values, and they are seeing that they can make progress into the company. Okay, so obviously there's a ton of benefits of a multi-generational workforce, right? You have different generations bringing different perspectives, unique opportunities to share experiences, ideas, and so that diversity in general, but in this case in age and in generations, really lends itself for putting the generations together and do some excellent problem solving, and coming up with creative solutions, which then also increases innovation, which is here the last point. But it really becomes if you have different life experiences, different worldviews, you're bound to get a unique point of view for every challenge you face. Also gives you a great opportunity to foster mentoring. There's younger generations that are looking for guidance and they want to advance, and you have an older generation that has a lot to share. And when that, especially baby boomers are starting to retire, you need succession planning, and you need to transfer that knowledge to that younger generation. And this is a great opportunity to pair them up and foster mentoring. And then obviously we talked a little bit in the different generations about the skills that each of the generations bring. So where Gen X is all about problem solving, where the baby boomers are about logical thinking, so you have these different skills, primary skills, that tied these generations that can really help you overcome some issues and also increase productivity and efficiency that way. But I'm not super naive, because obviously a multi-generational workforce also is going to bring some challenges. And this is where, I'm just bringing 3 up. There's tons more. But when you think about it, if you have to adapt your style, whatever it comes, communication style, managing style, to these different generations, that can be a lot. So obviously it brings in varied work styles. So where that can be a benefit of complementing each other, it can also be complicated because people are valuing different things, and therefore, and they support different values, number 2. So there can be some conflict in the workplace. And that's where open communication and being able to talk about these really come to sort of the rescue when you're trying to overcome these differences. And then you think about communication styles. Just to give you an example, the baby boomers to pick up the phone. And I still do this, and a smartphone would probably be more like this, or right. And they pick up the phone. Their communication style is very personable in that way, in person or on the phone, and that's their comfort zone. Where a millennial probably is going to write that email, that quick message, and or actually going back and forth on email. I know one of my employees, she sends emails for everything, and sometimes I have to ask her, it's like, what would be a different way of getting in touch with this person that maybe cuts out some time of the back and forth to come to the, hey, just pick up the phone. And I'm not a baby boomer. However, there's sometimes that you have to really challenge people in the way that they communicate, because they have a comfortableness with, in this case, a younger millennial with that email. And a Gen Zer, you think about like recruiting in the world of Gen Z, I mean, texting them is probably going to be your best bet. And so there's different tools that you would use to connect with people, but also styles, where Gen Xer is a lot more direct, and where a millennial is a lot more nudging and asking questions and making them come to their own answers. Now, being flexible is probably one of the best practices that I'll share as managing this multi-generational workforce, right? You're really creating a culture of flexibility, to inspire your employees, navigate through these different generations and different things in the workplace. And flexibility we'll talk about a little bit later when it comes to work time spent. Understand your employees. I just kickstarted with, avoid stereotyping and too much generalization of these generations. And first of foremost, understanding your employees as individuals. And it's not just about communication or about what they want, but it's also just about, how do you gain that trust so they will speak up and share with you what they actually are looking for, so you're able to prioritize the efforts. Providing unique opportunities for employees to learn from each other, whether that is project-based, whether it's mentorship, and tailoring your communication methods, in summary. Okay, so let's hone in on these younger generations. And I just pulled in Gen Z and millennials. This is really critical mass, because now they make up for about half of the workforce. And what do they want from a company? What are they expecting from a workplace? So above all, these two generations want an employee that cares about their well-being. And that was already in place, especially for millennials, before the pandemic. Now, as you can imagine, the pandemic just accelerated prioritizing that for them. And most organizations have wellness programs, but physical wellness alone doesn't really address what they're looking for. So these young employees, they may as well be physically healthy, but suffer from social isolation, which hurts their productivity. Workers may be experiencing financial hardship that affects their daily performance. And therefore, we like to at Ball look at an employee's well-being in these 5 different dimensions. And so employees who are physically thriving are financially secure, emotionally balanced, socially connected, and they see growth in the company, are generally more engaged and productive. And this is not just for that younger generation. It's just that this younger generation is prioritizing this to make this part of how they value the company and how they engage they are. I think when we look at the baby boomers in particular, and so in the older Gen Xers, well-being wasn't the task or the role of the company, right? They had that was their personal problem. But this younger generation really looking for an employer to look at them as a whole. They want to bring their whole self. They want to be able to bring all of what they have and who they are to the workplace. And therefore, well-being in all these different dimensions becomes a priority. So I want to go through not all of them, but some of them, and really kind of dive into what can we do in these dimensions of well-being to set ourselves up for success. Okay, career health. So career development is really all about helping employees grow. And lack of growth is actually the #1 reason for Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials to leave a company. So #1 reason why people leave is lack of growth or lack of development. And so at Ball, and I'll give an example of what we've done, is we implemented something called an employee growth program. And the employee growth program is focused on growing in the role, the department, into another job, so into the company. And so it's not just about making the next promotion. That is something that we really had to overcome, because a lot of people, when they look at career development or development, personal development in general, is with the eye on that more money, higher title. That still happens. However, if that's maybe not your desire, or maybe not your capability to become a supervisor, or to, become a lead, or to become a manager, that doesn't mean you cannot grow in your role and continue to improve. And so the other thing that we had to overcome is that careers or employee growth is not, we don't have a corporate ladder at Ball. We're a pretty flat organization with not a lot of reporting to reports and reports. And that is a conscious decision of our company. We want to keep decisions and communication lines short, so we are fast to act upon what our customer requires and asks from us. And therefore, we don't have a lot of layers. Which then is challenging to have something like a corporate ladder, like financial institutions or medical institutions often have all these different levels to go through, and very clear, if you do this in this amount of time, you will become a assistant, you'll become a specialist, then you'll become right? And you have all these different levels, and it's a really linear route. We started to describe employee growth as a rock climbing wall. So our goal definitely is to get you to the top, but one is you're in charge of it and you make decisions about how you might get there. Sometimes you can step one up, but a lot of times it's safer and set you up for success to go sideways. How do you stretch yourself? How do you become more instead of being an expert on this, how you become more wholesome as an employee? How are you gaining the skills to set yourself up to move to that, move one up on that rock climbing wall and move your way slowly into a better position? Along the way, you'll develop, grow. We will reward you for it. But that next title or that next huge promotion, that's not something that's the direct linear goal. And so what we've done is, in this employee growth program, it's really encompasses of a quarterly one-on-one that the employee schedules and preps for. So the employee is in charge of their own development. They buy into it. The manager and the company are there to support, assist, coach, so the employee reaches the goal that they have. And so in these quarterly reviews or quarterly one-on-ones, they, by the way, they replaced our annual performance review. That didn't work for us. I don't think an annual performance review really worked for anybody, nor the manager trying to recall a year of work, nor the employee who is nervous and is really being judged for the last few weeks of performance instead of a whole year of work. And it's just this daunting task. So every quarter we get together and we look back on our successes and challenges of the last 3 months, but we spend a majority of the time talking about the strengths of the employee. What motivates them? What makes them engaged in the job? What do they like to do? What are they good at? Having the employee prep for that, and then the manager supplement that. Then we look at the next step in the process about opportunities. What opportunities are there in the role, in the team, in the department, or into the company that the employee wants to pursue, or that the manager sees that the employee could engage in? And then third is setting goals and an action plan towards utilizing the strengths to go after these opportunities. I'll give you an example. So one of my employees, so she is our HR administrator, and some of her strengths, so she was in IT and finance before she came to HR, and she really is good in systems, good in data, good in, and has a really great relationship with the IT department because she speaks their language, right? So we identified that, and we identified that, and she really loves doing training. She doesn't have a lot of experience in it, but she loves to sit down with an employee and showing them, you know, how our HR system works, how our intranet works. And so we identified those 2 areas. Now in the department, we don't really have a person that is that tech savvy. So to really understand how we utilize our HR system best, we could really use a person that's tech savvy. So she saw the opportunity of marrying her tech savviness with the onboarding of an employee. And when it comes to explaining them how all our systems work from an HR perspective and where to find things to set them up for success and being autonomous in their role. And we married that all together. And so she designed the onboarding, the part of the onboarding process where when there's a new employee starts, she does that part of the training. So she developed it, implemented it into our system, and then is being able to execute that. And it was a win-win for all of us. She was engaged, she leverages her strength, and it really filled in a gap in our department. And so when we are putting things into action, this is where we use something called the 70-20-10. And so when you want to learn, like say a new skill, right? So you went through the strengths, you went through the opportunities, and maybe it's about obtaining a new skill. Let's say that like lean, so being more efficient, continuous improvement, improving a process is a skill that you want to obtain. Then how are we going to go about putting a program together to obtain that skill or to be able to pull off that learning something new? 70% of learning initiatives really should be on the job. So we can send a person to a class, which is that formal program, 10%. You know, but that's only one thing. People have to be able to apply it to the role to really become effective. So we say in this program, this sort of model says that 70% is done on the job, which are things like stretch assignment, project work, develop or improve a process, learn or apply a new skill, right? And that's done on the job. 20% of this action plan is done by learning through other people. So this would be a mentor program. This would be networking with other professionals inside or outside the company. This could be shadowing a colleague. And then the 10%, like I said, is formal training. So that's a class, reading a book, going to a seminar, those type of things. But this also says to you that this 70% on the job is right away beneficial for the company as well as the employee, because there's results coming out of it. And so when I see career development and the career health as really showing how progress and growth can be happening in the workplace. And this is part of the satisfaction and the well-being of our employees. Now, next, I would like to talk about emotional health, or called mental health or behavioral health. And so pre-pandemic, the World Health Organization already indicated that mental health is the #1 health concern of the world, right? And you can imagine that the pandemic just accelerated this. So let's look at some numbers that are based on the Canadian workforce. So one is the feeling of burnout were the main source of stress, where while finances and income protection, if they get sick, have coronavirus, was the second highest stressor, followed by an increased workload. Okay, so that's part of mental health, burnout, worried about financials, and as well as that workload, work hours, work-life balance. Strong majority of Gen Z and millennial Canadians are currently living with mental health issues, significantly higher portion than Gen Xers or Boomers. And the majority of employed Generation Z and millennial Canadians are struggling with anxiety, while 59% are dealing with depression. And then older Canadians are coping better than the younger generation in the pandemic, but it doesn't mean they were unfazed by it. I mean, everybody was hit by that. So, these are just the numbers. And so they're pretty significant. And what can we do with this sort of mental health, and what are their emotional needs? So one of the things that I want to press is that managers play a huge role when it comes to emotional well-being of the employees. And so when I say that, leaders, we should really focus on developing trusting relationships, because that's the way to be able to identify issues in the workplace that can negatively impact the employee's emotional well-being. And it's not that the emotional well-being should be treated by the manager, right? Because there's something called, one is confidentiality, but there's also, you're not a doctor, right? So it becomes really hard to, and it's maybe not in the best interest of the employee to become their therapist or help them overcome the emotional issue itself. However, to be able to identify when a person is in mental distress, that would be, a very positive thing. And so there is a lot of training for managers actually, and coaching to be able to identify emotional health issues, stress, and signs of burnout. And so when you be able to do that, you'll be able to point them in the direction of resources available to address their emotional stress. And at the same time, you can prevent a burnout from happening if that's work-related or not. And so, but the only way to do that is really developing those trusting relationships, right? When you're showing compassion and concern while respecting your employees' privacy, that's when employees starting to open up. The other level is about breaking the stigma around mental health in your company and amongst each other, and by talking about it, whether that is seminars that you offer your employees about mental health, whether it is those one-on-one discussions, opening maybe up about some of your own struggles, if that fits into the conversation that you're having. You also overcome the stigma of being able to talk about mental health. And I'll tell you one thing, especially the Generation Z, they want to talk about mental health. It's less of a stigma for them. And so as managers and maybe an older generation, becoming comfortable with talking about it in the workplace is a big deal. And it's hard to do. So having your managers trained and being open to it and knowing how to navigate that space is really critical. And then, of course, you can, as managers or as an HR department, consistently reminding employees of the available support services that you might have, or the health insurance companies might have to offer. Now let's talk a little bit about the other demands that they have that really plays into this emotional well-being, and that is the work-life balance. So work-life balance really is described as having the support, schedule, and flexibility you need at work in order to effectively manage your work and personal family responsibilities. They see work-life balance as essential because it helps reduce the stress, prevents a burnout, both professionally and personally, and it can really help improve mental health. And so the younger generation doesn't define, how do I say that? So the younger generation doesn't define itself by their work as much as the older generation. So when I say that, I mean that, where the baby boomers, part of who they are is the work that they do, right? And the same with the Gen X is a lot of that too, is the work defines who they are. But with the younger generation, it's much less so. It's just part of their identity, but they're much more central to the family, friends, community that they're part of. Is much more that's who they are. Work is just a little portion of it. So given this, especially the millennials, their personal time, they see that as much more important and prioritizing that over the work time. And like I presented before, the baby boomers might sacrifice, some personal aspects for their professional gain. This younger generation tends to not do that much. Now, you also think about the phases in the life that they are, because they're younger, they tend to start families. And so raising young children, you also think about that increases the commitment to the personal space more so than maybe the professional space. And so as they are closely connected also to their parents still, right? So they like to be personally involved and caring for them as they age. And so having the flexibility in the workplace to do that becomes increasingly important, just because of that they're young, one, and two is how they look at the way that they identify themselves. And so the nice thing though about this younger generation is, even though they would like to have the flexibility to take the child to the doctor at 10 a.m., they also don't mind answering an email at 10 p.m. or staying a little bit later, right? So the flexibility goes both ways. And I think that's also very important. And if you start talking about flexibility, that you talk about that aspect, that it's flexibility that you are given, but also receiving. And so flexibility, there's a lot of different types of flexibility in the workplace. And I'll talk about the most obvious one first, which is really hard to do in our industry. And that is remote work, right? You can water a plant from your desk at home. We all know that. So this is a challenging one that could work for your office people if you have some. But it's really hard to do for people that are either in the garden center or in the landscape business, or like really the boots on the ground. And so we'll just talk about remote work because it is a lot of talk, right? And you look at, after the pandemic, the number of companies that allowed for remote work. I will say that those companies, a lot of them, now there's more economical strain, are revising or relooking at the remote, especially fully remote benefits. So a lot of them that were fully remote during the pandemic and after until now are looking at hybrid work models. So where you work partly at home and partly at the company's location. And so the remote work or telework was a thing before the pandemic. It just accelerated it. And the other thing is, for us, is kind of a good sign because we like to have people in the office, or obviously we have greenhouses and manufacturing, people have to be here. We see the number of jobs posted in the last, where it was about 20% of jobs were remote offerings that are available jobs. Now it's only 12%. So you see the number decrease of this like fully remote, and for these fully remote jobs. And so when we look at, in the garden center, in the greenhouse, in the landscape trade, people that can do work from home, there's other ways to offer flexibility. And I think this is where we have to, with our employees, talk about that flexibility is more than working from home. So one of the ways that we can do that is, for example, compressed work weeks. So trimming the traditional work week from like a 5-day, or in the season 6 days, to like a 5-day, or to like a 4-day schedule is really quite a hot trend, and which a lot of times is Fridays as the day off. But I see a lot of companies, especially when it comes to like greenhouses, doing those divided, because we do need people to be in, the greenhouse to water our plants. And so the idea is that employees will be motivated by by more time off and working more hours during those 4 days. So let's say it's a 40-hour work week, you work 4 times 10 hours instead of 5 days of 8 hours. And so it gives that sort of flexibility, and it it just gives a little bit more freedom. And so when you have a workplace that, especially in the peak, needs to be occupied for like 7 days a week, this is where, a 4-day work week and another 4-day work week, like overlapping the weekend, for example, when it's really busy in the garden center, or whatever the peak day is, the shipping day, would be beneficial to have that double amount of employees. And then on the tail end, you would have that single amount of employees. And so we've seen that work in quite a bit of greenhouses and garden centers. Other way to look at flexibility is unlimited PTO or vacation. So there are some bigger companies like Netflix and Virgin Group and Groupon that have sort of like a non-policy when it comes to vacation time. And so it really communicates a trust of the staff to be trusted. It is a little bit of a risk, obviously, because it can be abused. And this is all where the strength of your managers come into play, to manage that situation and talk that through. And at the same time, avoid playing favorites or favoritism. And so you would need to have a right team and a right team of managers in place, and the right employees with the high sense of accountability to really make this work. And for our industry, when we have a clear peak, we would have some sort of blackout dates, as in days that you could not take your PTO. But then the times that it is a little bit slower, if it is, that you will then be able to use your time as you see fit. Other ones are really, job sharing. To 2 employees, split the workload and time commitments of one 40-hour work week. So this is when people would really like to work part-time and being able to fill a 40-hour work week. And that's called job sharing. They determine the schedule, who works at what time. You can leave that in the power of the employees. We've seen something called day shifting. So you have different schedules. There's people that work from like 7 to 3, and then there's people that work from 10 to 6, depending on their own needs. So if I need to drop off my child in the morning at 9 to go to school and I can start at 10, that's hugely beneficial for me, because my husband can then pick her up from school because he starts earlier. And that's the type of flexibility that that works for me, and that works for the company, because I still get to, there's plenty of people here that are here at 7 or 8. On-peak and off-peak work schedules. So employees work more during hours during their busy season, than off. So it's sort of creating this light at the end of the tunnel. You work 6 days a week during the spring, but then when it comes late summer, you're very flexible in the schedule. With all of these things, a policy needs to be put in place that talks about the positions that are eligible, how long did an employee have to work for you to do this, what performance targets must be met, sort of what are the parameters of this flexibility. But this is something that is doable, in the last few are doable in our industry. Okay, to move a little faster, going into financial health. So this is really the financial side of wellness, and it's often overlooked, but it can be a huge stressor and really move into that mental health space if people get hung up on that. And there's different motivations for stressors that come from a younger generation to an older generation. The older generation is more stressed about unpaid bills or unexpected bills, where the younger generation is just lack of understanding, leaning on their parents to make their financial decisions. And so when you look at financial health, it's a lot about education, but they're different topics per generation. And so other programs for financial health are things like tuition reimbursement. We've seen a lot of companies in North America starting to address, like, helping people with their student loans, which is something that could be, if you're wanting to attract that younger generation, could be a huge driver to attract them to your company. And then there's social health. So millennials value collaboration over competition, which is different than their generations before. They like competitiveness. And they're really like to share and do things together and work together. Gen Z, on the youngest generation, is a little bit more independent, but they do want friends at work. So again, the social aspect is important. Because they bring their whole selves to work, they also bring that social aspect. So having projects to work on together, millennials, and Gen Z's really being more about like the social hour and meeting after work for a drink, or having sort of book clubs, for example, is something that's really been popular. So this is where we looked at most of the elements of wellness. Physical health, I'm not going into. I think that's the most traditional one, and you probably have a pretty good idea about practicing safety, having medical insurance, either through the state, for the province, or independently offered to your employees. The last topic that I wanted to address were just other expectations of millennials and Gen Z when it comes to aligning with their values. So where the older generation is looking for a job and a company that with ethical leaders, right? So they really value ethical leaders and people. The younger generation is looking for a company as a whole that cares about people and planet, and that supports the causes that they believe in and outside of the workplace. And so although measurements for social responsible organizations have been around for decades, you know, it is becoming increasingly important, top of mind for the younger generation and how they make decisions of where they work. The main topics, sustainability and diversity and inclusion. And I'm just mentioning those two because I could do another 3 hours to talk about sustainability, which is both the green aspect, green practices that they really engage in, as well as the social responsibility that they are asking a company to align with, as well as diversity and inclusion, where especially the Generation Z wants to be acknowledged for being different, for having these different identities, being celebrated, and mainly being heard. And so having leaders in place that practice inclusive behaviors is really important for this generation. And a top priority for them when they decide who they're going to work for. And so in the last 55 minutes, we talked about the 4 generations into the workplace. We focused on that younger generation, prioritizing well-being as a holistic concept with 5 dimensions into the workplace, and what is expected of companies to be able to address the whole self and the well-being of our employees. We also talked about how generalizations were done in this presentation, and that attending to the individual employee, talking to them, asking what their desires are is very important and would be prioritized. And then we closed on sort of broader topics of sustainability and diversity and inclusion when it comes to how that aligns with our younger generation. And then I would like to open it up for some questions if there's any.
Monique?
Yes.
Hi, it's Art here. I have a question. First of all, just wanted to say thank you for that. That was really quite fascinating. Is there statistical information that supports the fact that, let's say, people like boomers like myself, I'm in that group at the tail end of it, I'll say, but are our values evolving as society is evolving? And you know, when I look at myself now compared to when I look at myself when I entered the workplace, I think my values have changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that, you know, you're just generally the generations just look at topics differently, but it doesn't mean that they don't care about the topics, right? So let's say diversity and inclusion in the workplace, for example, right? When you growing up as a baby boomer, you were very made aware of Martin Luther King and the protest and the you know, human rights motivation, and so you definitely care for the topic, maybe the same as that younger generation, but the way that people look at it in general is a little bit different. So where, and I think that's where a lot of this generational difference comes from. It's not that, you know, like a baby boomer cannot be tech savvy, right? It's just that they look at technological things differently. You would still prefer to pick up the phone versus texting back and forth forever. And so I think that's just the way that we practice and the way that we express ourselves in these areas are different. Financial, for example, you know, you might be concerned financially, have financial concerns for retirement. Are you having enough funds to retire? Where the younger generation is concerned about money as well, but more about their student loans. Doesn't mean that you both not care about the topic. It just expresses itself a little bit different.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Currently, we have no questions and answers. I think it was a lot of information for people to absorb and then kind of figure out what you have said and putting that on what they currently have right now as team members.
Yes. And I would say, I mean, my email address is in the screen. And I'll be willing, if you have any questions coming up later, just to shoot me an email. I'll be happy to set up a call to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you for that. And I think maybe the last thing that I'll share with the group to put it into perspective is, you know, talking about burnout, and the next 12 to 15 weeks, we're in that sort of blackout period where there's so much demands on our industry. And I think, you know, having this perspective about the long-term benefit of caring for each other and caring for our workforce, that could translate into amazing people not leaving our industry, and how beneficial that would be. So thank you for that, Monique. Very much appreciated. Oh, looks
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate it.
Okay, anything else, Carrie?
Nope, that's it on my end. Excellent
Okay.
presentation. You know, those comments are rolling in. So thank you again, Monique, very much for taking
You're very
some time.
welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
All right, Art, I'll leave it to you to close up.
Okay, well, thank you again. And also thanks to Carrie for organizing this session as well as the previous two. Just a reminder that I believe today's session will be available for reviewing again for all of the participants. And I think Carrie will be sending that out. So yeah, just wish everybody a great day, and thank you for your valuable time. So great day, everybody.